say, I do. How many worship you? Come on, get those hands in the air. I do worship you. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. God bless you and welcome to the Community Shall Be Restored television show. I'm your host, Prophet Cedric Banks, along with
Prophetess Donetta Banks.
We have a tremendous show for you today, outstanding show for you today, that's going to bless your life. We are here in the wonderful office of Federal Prosecutor Barbara McQuade, who's doing an outstanding job out there in the community, who's tenacious and zealous about keeping our city clean. And we thank the Lord for her. Barbara McQuade, welcome to the Community Shall Be Restored television show.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for paying us a visit.
Oh, thanks for inviting us in your wonderful place here. I say it office, but I think this is the conference room, isn't it?
Yes, we're honored to have you here.
Thanks. You know, one of the things what we want to get into, we got a few topics what we want to get into, Miss McQuade. We want to talk, there's several things what we want to talk about, but one of the first things what we want to talk about today is violent crime out there in the community. And we know that you are one who, a lot of violent crimes come across your path. That you have to deal with as a federal prosecutor. And can you tell us a little bit about violent crime that's going on out there in the community?
Sure. You know, Detroit is going through a great upswing in a lot of ways, a lot of great investment, but we don't want this to be a tale of two cities. We want Detroit to be safe for business in downtown and also in our neighborhoods with our residents. We all deserve to have a high quality of life. And when there is gang violence, armed robberies, carjackings, that impacts everybody. Drive-by shootings where people get caught in the crossfire. So we've come together with the Detroit Police Department, the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, some of the federal law enforcement agencies, put together an enforcement initiative we call Detroit One, where we are working united with law enforcement and the community to try to reduce violent crime, try to erode the no-snitch mentality that sometimes creeps in when people don't trust us, try to get out there and build that community trust, but also working at the precinct level. We've got teams from all those agencies I just mentioned assigned to each Detroit police precinct to really focus in with police officers who kind of know their neighborhoods the best to figure out who are the gangs that are driving violence here, who are the crews, who are the groups, and trying to go after those groups with the theory that it's really a very small number of people who drive violent crime in any large urban area, and if we can identify those, the trigger pullers, prosecute them and get them off our streets, we can restore public safety for everybody.
Now, we understand that one of the worst zip codes, not just in the community, but throughout the world, is 48205. Now, is that one of your main areas that you are targeting, the 48205 zip code area? And if it is, what are some of the crimes that is taking place in the 48205 area? That will be the District 3 area.
It is one of the most significant areas that we work on. Sometimes we've heard gang members who create videos, or they call it 4820 die, because of all of the homicides that occur in that part of the city. So it is a part that gets a lot of our attention. We've seen homicides, gang violence, armed robbery, drug trafficking, which often brings with it violence as drug groups want to protect their turf and their customers, and so sometimes violence can ensue, gun violence. So we're doing enforcement work there, but we're also doing prevention work, and I think that is equally important. We spend $34,000 a year to incarcerate one individual. I'd rather invest some of that money up front in trying to prevent crime so that there's no victim and no one going to prison. So I think that's a much better return on our investment to prevent. So we do a lot of stuff with youth in that part of the city to try to prevent young people from a path of crime and trying to turn them onto some other more positive activities.
So you're saying it costs $38,000 a year to house a prisoner, to keep a prisoner in prison?
So the estimates vary between 30 and 38,000. The number I often use is 34,000. But think about how much money that is.
Wow.
One prisoner for 1 year. And so think about all the, certainly there's some people who create risk of public safety who need to be incarcerated. But I think we need to be a little more selective about who we choose to prosecute. And I'd rather invest some of those funds up front in trying to prevent crimes from occurring in the first place.
Okay, Prosecutor McQuade, what are the age range of these people that are committing these crimes? Are they teenagers? Are they grown folks? What are the age group of these people that's committing these crimes?
Well,
could you tell it that way? Because we got about 8 million viewers out there in TV land, and I'm sure they're curious about what are the age groups of these people.
Well, when it comes to violent crime, we do find that it tends to be more males than females by a wide margin.
Okay.
And it tends to be teenagers into early adulthood.
Okay.
With some of the gangs, what we often see is the masterminds driving it are a little bit older, but they get younger teenagers to do sort of the dirty work on the theory that they're young, maybe they won't go to prison for as long, and they're doing some of the riskier work. And so I find those older, more senior people with experience to be even more culpable because they know what they're doing, but they keep their hands clean from the crimes. But under the law, we can hold them responsible for directing and aiding and abetting some of this criminal activity. So I would say anywhere from 14, 15 years old up to 30 is probably the primary group of people who are driving violent crime.
That young, 14, 15, they're out there like that?
Unfortunately, yes.
Wow.
And that's why I think so much of our youth intervention is so important. When you have young people, so often you see violent crime go hand in hand with poverty. You see young people who don't see having a lot of positive choices in life, but a drug dealer might offer them a chance to make a lot of money. And when they don't see other opportunities, that becomes very attractive and is actually a fairly rational decision for somebody who doesn't have a lot of opportunities. So we want to provide them with other opportunities by showing them other ways to earn an income and have a good life.
Are you doing anything to help these youth? Once you discover that they're out there committing these crimes, heinous crimes and things like that, if you catch them before they commit these crimes, does the system have anything to try to help these youth?
Yeah, there are a few things. One thing I want to talk about is the Ceasefire Gang Intervention Program, which has a lot of great services available for young people who need these services. You've been to a ceasefire call-in. I know I've seen you there, which is great. But at a ceasefire call-in, Mayor Duggan, Chief Craig, and others from the law enforcement community call in about 30 or so gang members who are on parole or probation and talk with them about three things. One is give them information that if you are convicted of a crime, now that you have a felony on your record, you could face some very serious consequences. Give them good information to make good choices. Number two, if you want to change your life and have a life free from crime, here's some services available for you. There's a phone number they can call and they can get things like drug treatment. They can get help finding a job, which can be very difficult when you have a felony conviction. They can get help with child support payments, transportation, housing, vital documents, a number of things.
They can get help.
They can get help.
With all of that?
Yes.
Wow.
And then the third part of the message is what we call the moral voice of the community. So we usually would have maybe the mother of a murder victim, which I think is what you heard, or a faith leader, to talk to young people about just the pain that is caused when violence is committed. I doubt most of these young men, when they go out to commit a crime with a gun, intend to kill somebody, but oftentimes that's what happens. Someone gets caught in the crossfire, and there really is a lack of respect for human life. And so trying to impress upon them the very real pain that they can inflict with gun violence is part of the message of ceasefire. And so there's some real services that are available to them, and we hope some good information that will help inspire them to take advantage of it.
We're here today with Federal Prosecutor Barbara McQuade. Barbara, what is a phone number or email for those parents out there who has troubled youth, where their youth is into all type of chaotic things out there in the community, and they're looking for help? They're looking for some type of help, some type of relief to help their son to take their burden off of their heart. What is a phone number or email where we can put that out there to those parents that's out there struggling and suffering with a youth that have gone down the wrong path?
Yeah, so they can always start by calling right here at this office, 313-226-9100. 313-226-9100, and we can direct them to a place where they can get help, because we really want to prevent as many crimes as possible from occurring in the first place. We got plenty of work to do. I can prosecute people all day, but I'd rather not. I'd rather see crimes be prevented and our city be safe. And so if we can prevent a crime, we're happy to do that.
Now, the programs that you have, that the system has and brings to the forefront, have you seen any type of turnaround? Do they bring any, are there any type of success that's involved? Have you seen any type of the youth progress, get better, turn around, that something may be encouraging for a mother or a father or uncle or auntie out there that's watching by TV, that's looking for some hope?
Yeah, so I can answer that on a macro level and a micro level. So big picture, in the area where we're working on ceasefire, we've seen a 40% reduction in shootings. And so that tells me we're doing something right, that we're getting through to some of the people that we're meeting with. And then on a micro level, we've had some individuals who've gone through the program who have really turned their life around. There's a young man who is enrolled in college in Alabama. He said, I just need to get out of my neighborhood for now, where I have a lot of bad influences. And he's doing great. There was a young woman that we met through this work who was involved in a gang and was selling drugs, and she had a great match by getting a mentor. And she said she had just never had a caring adult in her life who cared about her and helped her see beyond her current and immediate needs. You know, she couldn't imagine a life where she lived to be older than 25 years old, because she knew so many people who had died a young and violent death. And so her philosophy was, I'm going to get what I can while I can. I'm going to sell drugs, I'm going to make money, and I'm going to do all I can for myself for now. And she got a mentor in her life, connected with her through Alternatives for Girls, who's one of our great partners, who helped her to understand that you can have a long and happy life by following the rules, by going to school. She's in college now, doing great, and has incredible leadership skills. And so it's really great to see that talent directed in a positive direction.
Beautiful. Now, you mentioned ceasefire. What is ceasefire about for those out there in TV land that may not know about ceasefire? But tell us, what is ceasefire about?
So it's a program that was started by a researcher at John Jay College in New York, but it's been successful in a number of other cities. Boston, Cincinnati, and some other places, when they started it, saw some very steep declines in violent crime. And so the thought was, let's try it here in Detroit and see how it goes. And so, as I mentioned, there are these gang call-ins where we call in individuals, and we have a research partner from Michigan State University who looks at the files of young men that he thinks have potential. So these are people who they're almost always young men, although occasionally we have young women, who have a felony conviction. They're either on parole or probation. So when we call them in, they have to come as a condition of their parole or probation. We know they will accept our invitation. And they have a gang affiliation. But usually their felony conviction is for something that is not so serious that they are beyond redemption. You know, maybe they've been involved in a stolen car. Maybe they've been involved in some small-scale drug trafficking. But there is hope for redemption for these folks. And the message, as I said, the three-part message of consequences of criminal activity, help if they want it, and moral voice of the community is not only that we'll tell them, but we ask them to tell their groups, tell the other members of your gang that this is our promise. But we also promise you this: if the violence continues, we will come after you with the full force of the law. We will prosecute you, because we just can't tolerate people shooting guns in our neighborhoods and endangering the safety of our babies and our seniors.
Okay, now, what are some of the high crime areas that may be on the radar in the city of Detroit, in the community, if you're allowed to give that out?
Yeah, it's no secret where we're operating. On the east side, you mentioned 48205. The 5th and the 9th precincts are there, just north and south of each other on the east side of Detroit. We've recently seen a big uptick in crime in northwest Detroit, the 6th and 8th precincts. And so there's been a lot of activity going on there, and even an increase in the 12th precinct, up Woodward 7 Mile area. Okay. So we feel very good about the progress we've made over in 5 and 9 on the east side. As I mentioned, a 40% reduction with ceasefire. So just this year, we started doing ceasefire call-ins in the 6th, 8th, and 12th precincts in hope of making the same kind of reduction. Progress over there. It takes a little while. It took us a little while to get some traction going on the east side for to get enough people in to spread the message to other members of their groups and gangs. And so we've had, I think, 3 or 4 call-ins now on the west side, and we're hoping that we can continue to make progress there and have the same kind of success that we saw on the east side.
Okay, wow. Definitely, there's major progress going on with ceasefire. Can you give that number out one more time, Ms. McQuade?
Yeah, so the number is the number for this office, and that's 313-226-9100. And if anybody is looking for help with resources, whether it's for ceasefire resources or other things, we'd be happy to help match people to those resources.
All right, wonderful, wonderful. We're here with Barbara McQuade, federal prosecutor. Public corruption. When I mention public corruption, what comes to mind? Public corruption.
Well, the idea of public officials who have betrayed their trust to the members of the public that they serve. I am a big believer in democratic government, that we are a government of, by, and for the people. And if you want to be a public official, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But your loyalty belongs to the people and not to your pocketbook. And it's been so interesting to see over the years that I've worked here, we've had so many cases of public corruption, and I have learned that greed is a mighty, powerful force, and that many people are susceptible to it. I know the case of former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick got a lot of publicity, but he is not the only official who has been charged. We've had many officials. Right now we have a big case going on in Macomb County, in Chesterfield Township, Macomb Township, other places there with public officials there who have been charged with accepting bribes from a contractor. There is big money in these public works contracts,
sure.
And in exchange for getting them, especially in these smaller communities, $5,000 or so can be enough to turn an election in some of these smaller communities. And that's why we try to be so vigilant to try to root out public corruption there and elsewhere. I liken it to human nature, I think, is a very fragile thing. Think about yourself. I won't speak for you, I'll speak for myself. Sometimes, once in a while, when I'm driving, maybe I might exceed the speed limit when I'm in a hurry. But when I see a police car, I slow down, right? Because I don't want to get caught.
Right.
I don't want to be held accountable.
Sure.
I think it's the same kind of thing when it comes to public corruption.
Sure.
When people think no one's looking and no one's going to get caught, and someone will pass you $5,000 or more, sometimes quite a bit more, people are only too willing to take it. But I think if they know that someone is paying attention and is going to hold them accountable, they'll think twice about doing that. So that's why public corruption work, I think, is so important to all communities, to make sure that our public officials are acting in our best interest and not in the interest of their own greed.
Are we able to just touch bases on former Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick?
Well, he is serving his prison sentence. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison, which is a very substantial prison sentence. I know sometimes people have concerns that case was...
May I tell the people about your role in that?
Sure.
Okay, those who don't know, Barbara McQuade was the prosecutor in that case with former Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick. Many people mentioned to me they thought it was Kim Worthy, but Barbara McQuade was the prosecutor in that case. Now, if I could, 28 years, people say, wow, he did not murder nobody, or he did not murder anyone, or whatever, and how could he do 28 years? But there was some major strong evidence that was against him. But did it call for 28 years? And can we, what were the facts that was against him? I don't know them all. I'm not a prosecutor myself.
Yeah.
But I know there was racketeering and other things, restitution and...
Yeah, and I appreciate the chance to talk about it. So I share the credit or the blame, I suppose, with Kim Worthy.
Okay.
She prosecuted him first. If you remember the history of this, there was a whistleblower lawsuit brought by Gary Brown
right.
when he was fired,
Right.
and then it revealed that there was a relationship between Kwame Kilpatrick and his chief of staff, Christine
Right,
Reedy.
right.
And during the trial, he committed perjury.
Right,
Kwame
right,
So Kim
right.
Worthy prosecuted him for perjury.
Perjury.
His sentence wasn't lengthy, but it was a significant prosecution because it was that prosecution that caused him to resign from office.
Okay.
And then once he resigned, we had been investigating him for bribery, extortion, and racketeering.
Right.
And what we found is while he was in office, people were very reluctant to share information about him.
Mm-hmm.
But once he was out of office, people were now more forthcoming because they were no longer fearful that they were going to lose their business with the city by sharing information about him. So I give her credit for opening up those avenues of investigation to us. The other interesting avenue of investigation that opened because of that was, you may recall the Detroit Free Press published a story, got a hold of their text messages.
Right.
And they
right.
were interested in publishing
Right.
sort of the unsavory messages relating
Right.
to their relationship.
Right.
But it caused us to realize, well, if they were talking about that, they might have been talking about our extortion, bribery, and racketeering schemes as well, and they were. And so it built some very powerful evidence, because in addition now to maybe business people and others and members of his staff who would testify about these bribes and extortion, we now had text messages between him and his friend Bobby Ferguson and
Right.
others that could corroborate the testimony of those. But the scheme was really quite egregious. He was involved with extorting contractors doing business
Right.
with the city of Detroit, which are multi-million-dollar contracts.
Right,
And if you
right.
wanted to do business with the city of Detroit, you needed to hire his friend Bobby Ferguson
Right.
as the subcontractor.
Right.
You would need to pay him 25% of the deal, and if you already had an excavator, that's okay because he's not going to do any work for you anyway.
Right.
But you're going to pay him 25%, and so he extorted a total of $84 million out of these contractors, and
Right.
that ultimately is borne on the backs of taxpayers in a
Right.
city that was on the brink of bankruptcy and
On the
ultimately
brink.
did go bankrupt.
Right,
And so
right.
why so much time? It is a lot of time. Sentences in the federal system are often very steep. They are calculated under what's known as the sentencing guidelines, and you look at a number of factors that create a score. So if you're a public official, you get an increase. And a big increase.
So
comes
if you're
from
a
the-
public official, you get an increase.
you get an increase, and then the other thing is the dollar value of your crime increases it. And because it was $84 million, his guidelines actually came up to life in prison, but even we, the prosecutors, thought that was just too much time. So what we did is we looked around the country for comparable cases, and we found a case that was quite similar in nature out of Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, where there was a county treasurer or county commissioner who was involved in very similar public works, public corruption, and he got 28 years. And so we presented that to the court as perhaps a comparable case from which she could fashion an appropriate sentence. And so the judge did impose a 28-year sentence, I think in large part on that, and also on the theory that a life sentence was really too excessive.
Now, they're talking about, if I'm not mistaken, former Mayor Kilpatrick is trying to get an appeal on a reduced, or was trying to get under appeal at one time, trying to get a reduced sentence. Can that happen?
Well, he appealed to, the next stage is the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals and then the Supreme Court. Both of those courts denied his appeals.
Right.
The next thing he sought to do was seek clemency from President Obama.
Right,
Either
right.
a pardon or a reduction in sentence. So
Right.
obviously President Obama has left office and that was not
Right,
granted.
he didn't get pardoned.
He is certainly free to pursue that with the next president and see if he gets relief from the next president, but he did not receive relief yet. So that would be his only avenue of relief at this point.
Oh, okay, the pardon.
A pardon, yeah.
Yeah, and I know he was trying to get that. Some people thought that he was going to get a pardon before former President Obama left out of office in January. Some people thought he would get a pardon.
Yeah,
but
so-
it did not happen though.
No, President Obama was granted more clemency petitions than any president before him, and something like more than the last 4 presidents combined. But his focus was really on something different. He has made a real effort to try to reduce mass incarceration in America. There's a wonderful book called The New Jim Crow, written by a law professor named Michelle Alexander, who talks about this concept of mass incarceration. Because of the very severe penalties in some drug cases, what we saw is an explosion in the number of people incarcerated from the early 1970s until today. In the 80s and 90s, it really increased with mandatory minimum sentences. But most of those cases occurred in drug cases. And so he invited people to file clemency petitions and granted them. In the typical case where he granted clemency was when someone was perhaps a lower level drug offender in a larger group that was distributing drugs, got charged with the full amount that the group leaders were charged with, and although his role was smaller, got this very large sentence. And so we had people who were lower level drug dealers who got sentenced to 20 years, 40 years life in prison, and also because they had
drug dealers.
Drug dealers. So that was the group, non-violent drug dealers.
Okay.
That was the bulk of the group that President Obama focused on for his clemency.
Okay. I'm going to ask you about another case. It's not a federal case. I was looking at the newspaper the other day because I'm always trying to get a story or something. White boy Rick, I'm sure you remember him, is trying to get out of prison now. The paper said that white boy Rick, right in the front page, he's very optimistic that he'll be getting out of prison. Can you speak on that?
I don't really know about his case. He was convicted in the state system as a drug dealer.
Okay, right.
And I know he has sought reductions in his sentence before and has not been successful. Right. And I know that case is coming up again. But it's in the state system, so it's not something that we deal with. So I guess I wouldn't want to give an opinion on the likelihood of his success or failure. But we'll see how that turns out.
We'll move on.
But you raise an interesting question, I think, which is I think there is a perception in the criminal justice system that the criminal justice system is has racial disparities, and that's something we are working hard to try to remedy. You know, certainly the impact of people of color who are doing lengthy prison sentences is high, and it's so important in the criminal justice system that people feel not only that it is fair, but that people perceive that it's fair. And so we try to do some things, improving our diversity, for example, improving our training on implicit bias, for example, to try to not only improve the safety, but the perception of safety.
Okay, Teresa just gave me, we got 3 minutes left, Ms. McQuade. I got 2 topics here. I'm going to take human trafficking because that is a very hot topic in the community. We got a lady, she's a county commissioner. She also does work with human trafficking. I'll be coming on the show, but that won't be till about June. But I want you to speak a little bit, as much as you can, on human trafficking. So what's going on with human trafficking? How is it raised up in the community? Just tell us a little bit about human trafficking.
Sure. Well, you may have heard that in connection with the auto show here in Detroit just last month, there were something like 16 arrests relating to human trafficking. I don't know that the problem is growing. I think our awareness of the problem is growing. I know law enforcement is paying much more attention to the issue, but in any community where you have at-risk youth, there will be predators who try to prey upon them. And so when you have kids from broken homes, kids who are homeless, kids who are on the streets, kids who are just alienated, you will find predators who will seize upon them. They will use threats, violence, they will get them addicted to drugs so that they are reliant on their captors, and they will use them for commercial sex acts. They can get a lot of money for that. It's a very lucrative job for these predators, and then the kids feel like they have no one to turn to.
If a kid is brought into that situation, Ms. McQuade, how do they get out of it? Who do they talk to? They may have a parent just like that, you know, on drugs and on dope out in the streets. We got 1 minute to go. Can you speak in that camera and tell us how do they get out of it, Ms. McQuade, if they're in a situation like that?
They should turn to law enforcement. Any law enforcement officer wants to help them. What their captors will tell them is you're going to get in trouble as a criminal if you go to the police. And that is not true. A human trafficking victim is treated as a victim. We want to help you, and we want to get you back into a healthy environment. So please know that we see you as a victim and not as a criminal.
All right. What a dynamic show. I've been your host today, Prophet Cedric Banks, and we'll see you next Saturday right here on Comcast Channel 90 at 8 p.m. I've been your host today, Prophet Banks, along with
Prophetess Dinetta Banks
and U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuade.
All right, we'll see you.